Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to get started. I'm Elliot Levine, Research Director at the Aurora Institute, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. It's part of a series of more than 20 webinars we're offering this fall on important issues from the field of personalized competency-based education. There are several coming up, and all of the ones that have already happened are available on our website. You can access all of them through the link that we're putting in the chat box. The webinar series is a prologue to our annual Aurora Institute Symposium, which we're offering this year virtually on October 26th through 28th. And we hope you'll join us, and we're also putting a link in the chat box that you can access for more information about that. During today's webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to help us to get to know each other and learn from each other. And you can start by introducing yourself in the chat box, and please feel free to use it anytime to ask questions, to respond to other people's questions or comments, to share resources. Really, please feel free to use it for any of those reasons. And you could also share your thoughts about the webinar on social media. We've provided our Twitter handle here, and you could use hashtag Aurora 2020. And finally, today's session will be recorded and archived on the Aurora Institute website, and we'll email you in the next few days with the slides. Today, we're very fortunate to be joined by 5 education leaders from North Carolina, and they are Laura Knapp, Alliance Manager at Regional Education Lab Southeast, Kelly Johnson, who is the lead learner, and I love that title, Kelly, lead learner and principal at the Innovation Academy at South Campus, Johnston County Public Schools, Alyssa Cheek, principal, Tri-County Early College High School, Deborah Brown, Associate Director, Middle School, the Explorers School, and Amanda Northrup, who's the Associate Director of the Elementary School at the Explorers School. They will be speaking with us about how competency-based education helped them shift rapidly to online learning during the pandemic, with high levels of student engagement, personalization, and a focus on equity. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And our presenters are running today's webinar like a panel discussion, so we're going to turn off the slides, and I'll turn it over to Laura to begin some more overview and introductions. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thank you, Elliot. We're so excited to be with you today to share some of our experiences from the last 6 months. As Elliot said, my name is Laura Knapp. I'm representing the Regional Education Laboratory Southeast. In 2017, the REL began a research alliance in North Carolina focused around competency-based education and personalized learning. The name of our alliance is Measuring Success Through Competency-Based Learning. We began with 6 members spanning the K-12 to higher education space. And as our work has grown and we've begun working with multiple partners, our alliance has added 8 additional members, and we're now up to 13. We've developed strong relationships with schools and districts in North Carolina that are deeply committed to competency-based education and are existing on very different points in the implementation of this work. But I have here with me, I'm very pleased to have 4 principals who are deeply committed to competency-based education and are quite far down the line on that implementation scale. When COVID-19 hit our state in the spring, it became quickly apparent to those of us working with schools and districts that the ones that had a smoother transition to virtual learning than their peers were ones who had begun this implementation process. And it was not just because they already had technology in place. In fact, some of our schools faced all the same technology problems and connectivity problems that other schools faced. But a primary factor in their success was the strong relationships they already had in place with their students. The fact that their students had a sense of ownership of their learning and their growth objectives, and that their students stayed engaged with their learning, with their teachers, and with their peers. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the flexibility, personalization, and student engagement, as well as the role of equity in implementation and in adaptation to these instructional practices. But before we get into that, I'll let each of our principals talk just a little bit more about introducing themselves and tell you a little bit about their specific schools. Kelly?
Thank you, Laura. Yes, my name is Kelly Johnson, and I do serve as the lead learner and principal of Innovation Academy at South Campus. I'm here in East Smithfield in Johnston County Public Schools. We opened in the fall of 2017 as the lab school of Johnston County. So the idea being taking practices that we often hear about and that perhaps we're curious about, but putting them into place so that there is an actual picture of what they look like and not just theory or a one-day workshop on them. And so we are currently interpreting innovation, relevance, and relationships, the three tenets of JOCO 2020 that we were born out of, in 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars are PBL, project-based learning, personalized pathways, standards and competency-based teaching, learning, and feedback, and also social-emotional learning as a starting point with a focus and emphasis on restorative practices. We serve primarily students who will be the first in their families to go to college and or are from our densest pockets of poverty throughout our district. So that's where we focus our recruitment, but we are open to students throughout the district and take applications and review them all. And so we just have that emphasis on those 2 particular areas. So that's the Innovation Academy at South Campus.
Thanks. Alyssa?
I'm Alyssa Cheek. I'm the principal at Tri-County Early College High School in Murphy, North Carolina. Murphy is the westernmost town in the whole state of North Carolina, and we border both Georgia and Tennessee. We're a very small school. We take 40 students per year, and we do have students who stay for a 5th year. We were established in 2006 as part of the state's Cooperative Innovative High School Initiative, and I was part of the team that wrote the grant for this school and helped to open the school. Then I came here to teach as a math teacher for 2 years and then took over as principal in 2008. And I've been here ever since, and I love it. We are a competency-based, project-based school. We always have been, and we're constantly evolving and trying to make sure our students have that chance for, as Kelly said, rigor, relevance, and relationships, even in the middle of COVID and in the middle of remote learning. So we are dedicated to the same things we've always been. We're just in a different situation now.
Thank you, Elisa. Deb and Amanda?
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here today and joining us. My name is Deb Brown. I'm in about my 30th year in public education, started as a high school English teacher in New York and Massachusetts, and then jumped ship to North Carolina. I worked with Wake County Public Schools for about 10 years and then was part of the team that founded Research Triangle High School, which was the first school in North Carolina that was founded as a fully flipped school using a personalized learning approach, and project-based formed into that. A year or 2 ago, I kind of got a dream job where I was able to join the middle school program that my own children went to, and that's the Explorer School in downtown Raleigh. We are an independent public charter school. We're one of the oldest charter schools in North Carolina. We're about 22, 23 years now. Amanda will correct me on the exact age of the program. And I'll let her tell a little bit more about our mission and vision, but we are an open lottery. So anyone who would like to apply who is a North Carolina resident can apply for residency at our program. And it's just been a phenomenal place to work and embodies a lot of these values and concepts we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, so my name is Amanda. This is my 18th year in education. I did 13 years in the classroom, and this is my 5th year in school leadership. I run our elementary program, so I'm Deb's counterpart. We're a K-8 school. We were in the first 2 years of charter schools in North Carolina. So we opened in 1996. We're an independent charter school, which is hard to find these days. We're not part of any network or district. And we opened as a middle school initially, which is also backwards from what most schools do. So we were a middle school exclusively for our first 16 years, and then added an elementary program. We do not have our sights set on a high school. We're happy to be K-8 at the moment. So as Deb said, our school really focuses on project-based learning. We center environmental justice, social justice, and a strong belief that kids can change the world. So we're all about getting our kids connected to global and local issues, getting them out of the classroom, seeing our school as that learning extends beyond the four walls of a building, and getting our kids out, making real change in the world.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone. The first thing we decided we wanted to talk about today was the idea of curiosity. Characteristics of teaching and learning that sets competency-based education apart from more traditional education methods include student ownership of and engagement with their learning. This is evident in growth mindsets, persistence in learning, and the emphasis on curiosity and inquiry rather than grades in CBE classrooms. So the first question for the panel: how do you introduce these concepts of growth mindset, ownership, and curiosity to students? Specifically, how does this happen in elementary schools when students are new to the classroom? And how does this happen in middle and high schools when students have experienced a variety of other classroom experiences and may be coming from traditional contexts that emphasize the importance of grades? Deb and Amanda, I'll let you go take the first shot at answering this question.
Sure. So as Amanda mentioned, our school is really founded around these ideals of social justice and environmental justice. So curiosity is one of our core values that we work with all students on. And the entire program is really designed to help students form these questions about the world and then guide their learning towards solving the problems that they discover or answering those questions. And then we embed the standards from the academic standards in the middle of that learning. So our students take traditional classes, like usually scheduled in the morning. So they have a language arts in-depth class and a math class, but the afternoon is what we call expedition. And the expedition classes are always formed around a specific essential question, usually this combination of kind of a science and social studies. And the idea is to help teach kids to become curious and really explore all aspects of that question, with, again, those academic standards being built into that exploration. So that curriculum becomes very cross-disciplinary and gets strongly connected to the essential question, but then the project and the product that students will be created. There's usually a service learning component that gets folded into it. We work very closely with Design for Change, and we use that process a lot to guide the project. So the kids begin with these questionings, with the empathy piece, and then the imagining piece, and then going on from there. And some sample ideas of how this looks like and what we start with this is like the kindergarten class. Some of the projects we've done, talk about how do you introduce this to kids, began with sort of a simple question about what they wanted to make better in the world. And the question kind of began, how do we bring joy? How do we bring more happiness back into the community? And it ended up being a project where the students thought, you know how you go to get coffee and they'll give you those little holders that the paper wrappers on them that help keep them, the insulators there. The students took a bunch of those with working in partnership with a Raleigh downtown place called A Place at the Table. That's a cooperative that helps provide lunches and meals at low or no cost, and did wrappers, and they all designed them. So as someone who went to the Place at the Table to get a cup of coffee would have an individually decorated piece from one of our kindergarten students with a message on it or a picture or something in there. 8th grade, for example, getting into sort of the more higher levels, began with a question about water. Where does our water come from? Where does our water go to? And this becomes a very in-depth study of water systems, outdoor stream studies, environmental impacts, equity issues around access to water. Embedded in this are reading books like A Long Walk to Water, social studies projects, service learning projects. And it really ends up being something where every student can kind of find their own pathway to that and has lots of different ways to demonstrate their learning. When we transitioned this whole model to digital, when everything kind of shut down in the spring, we found that we were still able to use a lot of these digital tools. The breakout rooms and collaboration worked really well. If you ever get a chance to visit Explora's physical campus, we don't have any individual desks. Everything is done around tables and collaborative groupings and lots of breakout spaces. So we were able to translate that digitally to that in sort of some asynchronous learning as well. And we focused a lot on projects and things that could be done from home. We used there was a Do Good from Home project that actually came from Design from Change. And we actually found in some ways that, what digital does is it kind of breaks down some of the walls of the classroom, kind of flattens the walls. So we were able to bring in experts and people who might not have been able to travel to see us under regular conditions, were able to come in as guest speakers virtually. So we've been able to host engineers from the city of Raleigh, people who were refugees from African countries that have had difficulties with water, and just all kinds of amazing access to resources that help to bring the learning and keep the learning centered on the kids' questions and keep this curiosity and engagement going. And I'll let Amanda chat a little maybe about elementary here.
Yeah, because I'd love to add on to, Laura was asking, how do we get curiosity started, right, at the very beginning? And a lot of that has to do with student choice, right? At Explorers, we're all about student choice. And so that means that whether it's in a project where students are choosing the particular type of piece they're going to explore in their project, or the way they're going to share their project, or how they're going to choose to work together, we're trying to empower student choice all of the time. So for instance, right now, our fourth graders are beginning a geography project around North Carolina's history, North Carolina's culture, geography, etc. And the students are provided categories, and then they have choice within that category. So, and they get to choose what they investigate, how they investigate it, how they share what they're doing, how they've presented what they're doing. So there are very few sort of barriers, which allows them to use that curiosity to drive their work and develop that competence in a way that is also enjoyable and brings them confidence, right? We really believe in that connection between competence, confidence, and enjoyment as a way to bring children to all of the things that they're learning and to that love of school.
Thanks. Alyssa, Kelly, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so the way we introduce growth mindset and curiosity and ownership to our students, and then we're able to carry that over when we went to fully online, is through a focus on Tony Wagner's 7 survival skills. We call that our Bible. So that's what we follow. So we do the 7 survival skills from Tony Wagner, and I very often say that we use our curriculum to teach those skills. So our focus is not so much on the curriculum itself, but on using the curriculum to focus on the skills. And their projects are a way to bring that curriculum and those skills together and to stoke the curiosity for those students. So that is also a way where a lot of relationships are developed, because among the students, between the students and the staff, and those relationships were absolutely key in helping those students learn growth mindset, ownership, because that's how we are able to speak to them, and then they are able to speak to each other, is through the development of those relationships. And you're probably going to hear me say a lot about relationships as we talk throughout the rest of our seminar today. Currently, one of the things that we're doing is developing with Rail's help, we're developing a roadmap which leads to a graduate profile. And that's the skills that we want all of our students to graduate with. And the roadmap is the way that they're going to get to through all of those skills and take them with them when they leave. So that gives them the ownership for their own learning. The projects do the same thing. We're very much focused on, it's not about getting it right the first time. There's so much more learning that goes on if it's not correct the first time, and that's where your growth is going to occur. So all of those things together, I think, are how we bring that whole idea of growth mindset and student ownership of their own learning, and that focus on skills as opposed to just curriculum.
Yes, and I'll just add to that I think it's a very old adage, but the idea that do as I say and not as I do is very backwards, because as humans we're programmed to model what we see, and so that I think is the most important part. You know, we have our 9 core values that are on our poster back here. Sounds like a lot of overlap with my friends in the seminar here. And so, you know, just going back to that, you know, even the language of my title, for example, on the organizational chart, yes, my title is principal, but that sounds very final. When I call myself, as I do in our regular conversation, lead learner, that sounds very fluid. It sounds very growth focused. And when they hear us say things, all of our adults here, when our students hear us say things like fail forward, you know, doing that with your learning family on your side, you know, we're here for each other. Alyssa said, you know, relationships. It is all about that, and not only in growth mindset as individuals, but our children are watching us and how we interact around the work as well. So I'll give an example of a couple of years back. Those of us in Eastern North Carolina are keenly aware, but others may be too, of the impacts of Hurricane Florence. It's 2 years ago now. And so we had some folks here on our team who were personally affected, you know, based on our location and where some of us are from. And so what we came together around the table to do was to build this driving question, because we felt compelled to do something. And so the driving question, after a couple of hours of hammering it out, because, you know, a really well-written question takes a long time, but then it has ripple effects, and it's a question that continues to follow us. It's a question that took us to Rome last fall through Design for Change, you know, to experience that platform and those things there. And the question is really timeless. It's what is our responsibility to address suffering in our community? And our thought was that our students would focus on hurricane relief. As it turns out, many of them did, but some of them were not compelled by that. So then when they started bringing us ideas about, you know, what does suffering look like in various places? What is community? Like, what does that word mean? And then also grappling with the term responsibility and how to address it. You know, those were all words that we had to really kind of sink down into and help them to define, and alongside them, with them, and through their voice. So when we got to the point where we were ready to do something through the process, the Design for Change process, we had everything from hurricane relief to picking up litter in the community, to delivering supplies to animal shelters, to battered women's shelters, but the students were asking for that. So we had a choice at that point. It was what we envisioned, and could we allow for that choice within the question? And the answer should always be yes to that, because it's not our growth necessarily in that, but it did create growth for us. But it's really about them and what is important to them. And that is a question that we continue to carry forward, and through COVID has allowed us to continue to return to suffering and what our responsibility is to address it in our community, and what, you know, again, redefining what our community is. And so I think that's an important part of ownership and agency, and rooted in your core values like curiosity and relationships.
Thanks to everyone for those compelling answers. The next thing we want to talk about, in addition to curiosity, is mindset and engagement. When schools closed abruptly in the spring because of the virus, you were all able to transition your students to remote learning quickly and successfully, because the foundations of learning and student engagement that you already had in place as a result of your competency-based culture. How did the relationship between curiosity, mindset, and engagement help you immediately and successfully pivot from in-person to virtual learning? And how has this relationship continued to help you during your current and ongoing transitions? Elisa, you want to start with this one?
Sure. When schools closed in the spring, I truly believe that the thing that helped us continue as much as possible with what we were doing was, again, those relationships that we have with the students and the families. So it was not hard for us to reach out to the students. We had kind of prepared them and organized around how we would do things if we went to a fully remote and online presence as a school. But it was still, they showed up because they wanted to be a part of the school community. They wanted to see each other. They still wanted to work together. So I really, truly believe were exactly what helped our students to stay engaged and finish out the year the best that they could. When we came back in the fall, we knew that we were going to be partly remote and partly face-to-face. So our school system chose to do cohorts, as I know a lot of school systems across the state did. And so our students come 2 days a week face-to-face, and they come 3 days a week remote. And the students who chose to be fully remote, we put them with different teachers. So we did not, I chose not to ask my teachers to teach both remote only and blended. So I just felt that was too hard. So all of our students who come to school, they're here 2 days a week, and they're remote 3 days a week. So it was really important to us to make sure that the experience that we provided for them during their 2 face-to-face days was valuable, and that would make them want to be at school and appreciate what they were getting. That would also support them in their remote days when they weren't with us, and still allow them to have that interaction and that project-based learning experience. So I'm going to share one project that our teachers came up with. Normally we do school-wide projects, but we didn't feel like we could do that in this environment. So we paired up. So we're in teams of 2. And my biology and my English 2 teacher paired up, and they did an outdoor project. So they also found a way to have classes outside, so they're socially distanced. And outside, of course, is safer. And I still don't think they've had one class indoors yet. They meet in our pavilion outside. And so what they did was we're surrounded by these beautiful mountains and woods. So that's a privilege that we have. And there's a nice creek that runs near our school. So they found an app where you can just hold it up to something outside, and it will identify whatever it is, a mushroom, a bug, a tree, or whatever. So they put this whole project together where it's based upon the students going out and literally sitting for 15 minutes just to enjoy nature. And I just said we live in the mountains, and we were shocked at how many of our students had never literally been into the woods, had never been into a creek. I was just dumbfounded. So they go out, and they just have to sit, and they write in their journals, which is the English part of it, of course, a part of the English part of it. And they're reading a book that's related to something. And these kids would go out, and they would spend all morning identifying things, holding their phones up and identifying these things. And then they would come back and they would do whatever the activity was. Well, it's amazing to me that they're out there for a couple hours sometimes. And here's an example of how engaged they are. This group of boys, we call them our squirrely boys because they can't be still. So this really helped them too. This project was really good for them. They come back in, they're talking and loud, and you can hear them, and they're having this great time. And all of a sudden, one of them sees a spider over on this little catapult that we've built. It's not little, it's about 7 feet tall. And there's this big spider web, and one of them goes, "Oh my gosh, what is that?" And here he goes with his phone to identify whatever this spider is. And the other 4 or 5 boys that were talking to him, having a good time, they drop whatever that conversation is, and immediately here they all have their phones up trying to identify this big spider. And that's the way it's been. It's just they are so engaged with it They're so curious to know everything. Some of them said, I never even knew we had mushrooms in the woods, which again blows my mind, but so they're out doing that. So that's the way that we have transitioned this year, is we have tried to find a way to engage the kids that still makes them be able to socially distance, but engage with each other, that still has that project-based, competency-based component to it, and makes their time at school valuable to them and supporting to what they're going to have to do when they're not with us. And that's one example of how we've done that this year.
Thanks. Are there others that want to share?
Yeah, I'll add on a few things. At Explorers, we actually have a word we've created called Exploracy. It's an adjective to describe things that kind of fit those values and parameters and the way that we like to do school. And transitioning into digital learning quickly was maybe one of the most exploracy things we did. You know, how do we still take those values and those connections? You mentioned the relationships. We run a crew model, so the groups always have a small group that starts in the morning, and we build our relationships with that quite a bit. And what we found is we had to do some pivoting. Exploracy also means very flexible, very responsive, because we're in downtown Raleigh. As Amanda said, we like to think of the whole city, and every resource we have around us is really our classroom. And a lot of times during the regular school year, if something's happening in the city, there's a protest, there's a march, there's a festival going on, the teachers will kind of chuck everything they're going to do for the day and say, let's go out and let's explore that. Let's see what we can learn from there, bring that back, have those discussions. So when we pivoted to remote learning, we found that how do you continue to build those relationships? Particularly coming in the fall, where suddenly you have new students, right? Our intake points are at kindergarten and at 6th grade. And when we left in the spring, we were 3/4 of the way through the year, and the crew teachers already had pretty strong relationships built up with the whole school community. The parents knew the teachers, all of that. So how do you form those in the beginning, and still, how do you form those now completely remotely? One of the things we noticed that I think was particularly exploracy is our global arts program, which is kind of our electives program, had to really do a pivot. And we had to really kind of rethink the whole schedule. Usually in a traditional year, our global arts teachers would see the entire school. So they'd see them in, in groups at times, but like in a single day, they'd see everybody, 7 through at the middle school, 5th or 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And remotely, it's really hard to build relationships that way. And so the global arts teachers on their own put their heads together, and they designed a new elective program. So students all choose small group electives, and they do just a short period of time with a particular topic. And each teacher, from our wellness classes to our visual arts classes to our geography classes, came up with some really cool short-term things, let the kids pick. So there's your student voice, your student pathway in that. And then they were working with a small group for about 4 weeks at a time. So they had a chance to build those relationships and make those connections, and the kids were really engaged in what was happening. So sometimes it's a matter of rethinking, being willing to kind of toss out your whole master schedule and rethink from the beginning, what can we do that's going to keep these exploracy things that we want about school in place.
I'll add to that, the flexibility and the fluidity pieces are key. Being responsive, as I've heard some of my colleagues use those terms. And I believe that ability to pivot quickly it's cultural as well, and it's all about our mindset. And the relationship piece is key, as well as the mindset that the children have around why they're doing the work that they're doing. And so if the point is to chase a grade, and then I might believe, even before it's official, that grades are not something that are going to continue through the last quarter like we saw in the spring, then I might feel less motivated to continue with my work. What we saw is that between relationships that had been built for the 3 quarters prior to that point, and we have an advisory model, sounds a lot like crew that Deb mentioned, through those relationships and through the mindset of progress and growth towards mastery in the standards and the competencies, our kids, we had some outliers, of course, I think like anyone, that we had to reach in a different way. But for the most part, because they're chasing growth, they continued to do so. And so it wasn't about a percentage. It wasn't about, I'm trying to get this particular grade. It was about, hey, I've been working hard in this standard or in this set of standards, and I want to keep going. And it was motivating them in a different way that was relevant to them.
Thanks, Kelly. Amanda, is there anything you want to add to the conversation?
I mean, I think I would echo what everybody else is saying, but one of the things that Alyssa mentioned that I'll just bring up again here is that relationships really rise to the front, right? When we're in a virtual environment, or even if now your school's in a blended model or whatever the case may be, we've talked a lot with our faculty about trauma and how really and truly every single teacher, every single student, and every single adult in a child's household has now experienced trauma. That living through this pandemic, that being quarantined in your home, all of that is trauma. And so it's important when we think about what do our academic structures look like, that we bring relationships even more forward than we would have previously. And so that means that we're building into our day opportunities for kids to connect with one another in non-academic ways. We're building into our day more flexibility, more relationship-driven questions, games, activities, all of those kinds of pieces, connections with family members, wraparound support, all of those pieces rise to the fore before we can see any sort of academic competencies.
I'd love to tie that back into the way we talk about competency-based education too, because so much of the trauma, particularly we hear from parents, is this worry that everyone's behind, right? They're all behind. They've fallen so far behind. They've lost so much. And we talk about what are they behind? They're behind a national standard that was set for specific, more traditional ideas, right? So if you look at this from a mastery-based model, kids aren't behind at all. They just haven't mastered something yet. They may need more time to get that in, but that has been sort of a comforting message to give out to families and to parents, is that we're not worried about they're behind and where their SAT score is going to be. They're behind because they don't have an A yet. We can still measure their growth, and we can still keep that growth mindset without worrying about how far they've, what they've lost and how far they're behind.
Excellent points. Thank you. The third topic that we wanted to talk about was equity. So even when a strong culture of engagement and growth mindset exists, the unexpected school closures of last spring impacted equity in schools across the country. So how did you make sure all your students had access to their learning and instruction despite inequities in technology? And then what other inequities did you face? Learning styles, personalized learning remotely, access to resources, things like that. So how did competency-based education structures and culture help you mitigate these issues? And Kelly, I'll let you start with this one.
Yes, so as I mentioned about our advisory model, not only does that allow us to daily check in with our kids, it also sends a very strong message that social emotional learning belongs to all of us. We're all counselors. It's not just the counselor's job. And so with that and those conversations that we deliberately have when we circle up, for example, either in a proactive or a restorative circle in advisory, we are getting to know our kids and their entire situation. I think Amanda used the word wraparound. It's a wraparound service. And so when you invest in knowing a human, you know that you are responsible for science content, for example, but you don't teach science, you teach people. And those people have a real story that is our responsibility to know, and as it's ever evolving and ever changing, to do so. So for us, that was already in place. And as we began to sort of hear the footprints, if you will, of a potential closure, we shifted our focus to getting to know really intimately what their technology needs were at home. So through that, we were able to monitor a spreadsheet or input on a spreadsheet and monitor, knowing that once the decision was made for closure that we had 88 students who needed devices at home. And so we had a plan in place at the very beginning of the following week. I think it was around St. Patrick's Day. I think it's all running together. But I believe it was then. And so what we had was socially distanced, safe ways for parents to come and pick those devices up in windows of time, and or in some cases going to deliver them, to our students and families. And so that provided for equity of access. We also assisted with procuring hotspots, which is something that our district has done as a whole here this fall as we opened that way as well. But I'll go back to mindset. And this is also in the hiring process. Sometimes you have a really great content specialist, someone who has a solid background in science, for example, or math, and it's really great to have that. But in our hiring process, we look for those core values that we have as part of our as our foundation, because in order for us to expect our students to demonstrate those, we have to model those, and we have to do so in whatever challenge is sent our way. And in this case, it was school closure and the coronavirus. And so, going back to that, our folks believed that it was their job, to know those things, to be part of the devising of a plan to solve any problems that existed around technology. And then also, as the personalized pathways were set up that way for students to continue to progress in the competencies and standards, we just didn't have the lag that I think others experienced. We were able to just hop right back on. And with the nature of personalized pathways being largely on, online content anyway, so that kids can progress when they're ready to progress in a standard or a competency, then it was just a matter of getting the technology in their hands. So we were able to do that pretty much within the first couple of days of the closure. So we didn't lose any time, therefore we didn't lose any momentum. And that was with our students and our staff.
Thank you, Kelly. Others?
One of the things I think that we did was we also have an advisory system. So each of our advisors made personal contact within that first week with each of our advisees through a phone call. So we could talk to them and hear their voices and make sure they were okay. And we did that every week during the entire situation until school was out. And then we continued to do it throughout the summer every other week, simply because we were concerned, and we would ask them questions, simple things, the basics. Do you have food? Is everything okay? How are you feeling? Those simple things, more than we talked about are you doing your work? So when we made those contacts, again, it was still building those relationships. We didn't expect less of them as far as their academics were concerned, but we did make sure as we made contact with them that they had the things they needed to support their learning. So we're a one-to-one district, so all of our students already had devices, thank goodness. That was a blessing. But we did have to do what Kelly said and provide some hotspots in places. We had to help some figure out a method of transportation to get to places where internet was available and Wi-Fi was available to them on a regular basis. Some of them had no internet at all, and so we would take them paper copies of things, which was our least favorite thing to do, but if that's what they needed, then that's what we were going to do. So the students, again, I think I heard everybody say it at one point, there was really no lag in our students' learning. They really wanted to continue learning. There was no, just tell me the minimum I have to do so I can get a grade. We didn't hear that. They really were committed to their learning, and they weren't afraid to let us know what they needed. And so we just did whatever they needed, whatever they asked us to still achieve at the same level than they would have if they had been at school with us. So it's just whatever they needed, we made sure.
That's kind of where we were too. And a lot of things you mentioned about making sure every kid had devices, making sure that the kids who were, had food supplies and that needed that sort of support as well. I gave my staff 2 messages when we went into remote, is that they really just had 2 jobs, and that was to keep the kids connected, keep them connected to you and to the school, to each other, and keep them connected to a love of learning, not so much what they were learning or what standards, but that to keep them engaged in that whole process, that curiosity, that questioning thing that was going on. And I think in some ways the equity questions have been interesting at Explorers. We're partnered with Peaceful Schools, and so we are working around a lot of these ideas of restorative justice, on circles, on making sure that every voice is heard. And in some ways, the technology, once we made sure that everyone had a hotspot and internet access that was stable, a device that was stable, that in some ways it became a way for voices that hadn't been heard as much in the classroom to become more available. Some of the disciplinary issues went away, and the distractions, and kids who might be very quiet in class were suddenly very active in chat, for example, or very active in small groups. And we were hearing perspectives and hearing from kids that we might not have been hearing from in another way. And I think one of the other interesting equity pieces is that apart from just access to technology, you really become more aware of how students' home lives are functioning. And in many cases, the same kids who struggled in school are the kids who don't necessarily have that parental support at home, and they were still struggling at home. And our counseling staff was phenomenal at stepping in and doing parent nights and parent connections, and if needed, one-to-one support, so the parent could learn how to sit down and how to support their students. And that was an interesting part of the equity, is to making sure not necessarily just a poverty issue and an access to devices, but who had access to that support at home, and how could we help make sure that every kid could get that sort of support.
And if I'll just tag on there, we've talked a lot about equity for students, but our teachers needed that support too, and our staff. And so, one of the things you heard Deb mention is counseling. One of the things we did pretty early on at Explorers is we took our support staff and divided us among the teams of teachers, so that every team of teachers had a point person that was a support staff person, so for coordinating whatever families needed. And then we added more counseling staff. We've moved money around and added more counseling staff, knowing that there was really a lot of work to do, and continues to be a lot of work to do. Like Alyssa talked about, that meant continuing services during the summer that we might not normally have done. I can answer Alyssa's quick question in chat, which was to talk more about Peaceful Schools. Peaceful Schools North Carolina is an organization. It's based out of Carolina Friends School in Durham, but they work all the way across the state. And their entire purpose is to help schools be a safe place for students, where students and teachers are well cared for, are relationship centered, and are safe and happy and have well-being at school. And so they work a lot on school culture and work alongside staff as far as implementing restorative practices, those kinds of pieces. And so they've been a great partner for us.
Thanks to everyone on the panel. I wondered if anyone in our audience has questions for anyone on the panel.
And I'd say folks can feel free to type them into the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask questions directly. We'll just wait a minute, because we know that it takes folks a little while to type into the chat box. And while we're waiting for that, I'll ask a question that I was wondering about. Kelly, you referenced much of the personalized content already being online as an advantage around remote learning. And Deb and Amanda, it sounded like you were talking quite a bit about personalized projects, student-driven projects. And I forget who mentioned about the global arts teachers creating a series of smaller student-driven projects. So it sounds like there's a wide variety of learning happening both online, that is using devices specifically, versus work that might be more away from devices. And I'm just wondering if you could talk more about how competency-based education is interacting with those issues in this remote or hybrid context, and kids using devices.
Yeah, Explorers really works a lot of the year, again, on this idea of outdoor education. So some of the things that we would have kids do, I mentioned stream studies, gardening projects, are things that we've been able to keep up remotely even. We do a lot of urban gardening, and there was just a small group that was at the school actually harvesting some of the rosemary and things that were planted last year to work on that kind of thing. And maybe Amanda can talk a little bit about the gardening team. We had teachers did a lot of like driveway visits. So they would check in with students and go to that particular home. They'd, sit 6 feet apart and have a conversation and look at things that they could do around that particular issue. We have a student who did a worm composting project in his backyard and was filming it and adding flip grids to, adding to a flip grid to show the worms and how the composting and thing was done. So I think that idea of keeping that personalization in, that kind of hands-on learning, that away from the screen a chance to do kind of asynchronous, but still working on those growth skills, particularly in the reporting on the project. So the kids are doing something, but then they bring that back into the academic standards with the writing pieces that they're doing, the presentations that they're doing, even though those may take the form of being recordings now instead of being in class.
And I'll just tag on there too that I think one of the things we've tried to be really careful about is the boundary between learning and compliance, to where a tempting expectation for students is around how do I know the kid is doing the work, right? If I set an assignment that is offline, because kids can't be attached to the screen all day long, right? That's not good for their well-being. If I set an assignment that's offline, say go build something, go create something, go do whatever you're doing, go out in the garden, then the temptation is to create a compliance piece around that. How can they prove to me that they did this thing? They need to write a reflection, or they need to, whatever they need to do. And so really working with teachers around the students don't have to submit something in every class every day to prove that they're doing work. And that, as Deb was saying, it's okay for there to be an offline project that at the end of the week results in some form of presentation or sharing that's done virtually.
Thank you very much. And Laura, I noticed that there are some other questions that are in the chat box now too. Really appreciate those explanations.
Yeah, a question from Brian is, what types of platforms do your students use to track their progress towards competency and standards?
I'm gonna do a quick shout out here to my previous school, because it might be something that's of interest to the group. Research Triangle High School partnered with Success and the Summit Learning Program that comes out of the Pacific Northwest. And Summit Learning uses the personalized learning platform where the kids can do the assessments of the various skills and the core competencies that they need to learn. And those are available to students at any point. So this is a Summit runs this, if you want to look at Summit Charters, runs it. It's a Zuckerberg Chan Foundation program, and it's run free. And they give you an entire curriculum if you want to use everything that's there, or the school can customize it. At RTHS, we chose to customize the whole platform, which was a lot of work on the teachers to build out all the content and all the assessments. But it does mean that idea that students could completely track where they were. They knew exactly what they had passed or not passed. If they missed a question, it hooked them back up to checkpoints for things that they could go back and review. So they knew that particular piece of a standard was what they were missing. And it was a very effective way for students to get, and parents to get, individual feedback on exactly what the students had accomplished and where they were in the process. I'll let Amanda, if she wants to, talk a little bit about our jump rope and progress reports and the achievement report writing that we do at Explorers as a way for students and parents to track growth.
Yeah, as I put in the chat, our grades are beginning, developing, and accomplished, where developing is really sort of the big swath. It's not like cut into thirds, right? And then we have sort of descriptors for what each of those means, where accomplished really gets to consistency and independence and those kinds of pieces. We really view the standards as being year-long standards. So just because we said a unit is going to happen in October doesn't mean the kid needs to master that skill in October, right? There are year-long standards, and so we're probing constantly on all of those pieces where students might have been staying at developing, providing opportunities for them to continue to grow and learn. And then our reporting looks like we use a program called Jump Rope, in which Kelly mentioned they've also used at their school. And we call our report cards or progress reports achievement reports. We operate on a trimester schedule. We've done that for the sole purpose of giving teachers more time to write thorough achievement reports. They are comprised of both the scales, beginning, developing, accomplished, and then also narrative pieces. So teachers write somewhat lengthy narratives in the social emotional realm, and then in each of the content standard or content areas as well. And finally, at one point, we were sharing grades, beginning, developing, accomplished in every standard in the curriculum. There are like 300 standards in the curriculum. So the document was, like 16 pages long and nobody could read it. And so what we now do is teachers create what we call umbrella standards. So every content area has 5 to 7 umbrella standards typically that the teachers write in parent-friendly, student-friendly language that sort of chunks like standards together, and that's what they're grading.
Thanks. We have another question about letter grades. Do you use letter grades for those in the upper grades, or do you use mastery of standards and then convert to grades at the end of quarter or semester?
I know that Alyssa probably has some insight here just from the high school perspective. I know there's some differences there in terms of what colleges require and so forth, but us in middle school, we are able to avoid the utilization of conversion to letter grades other than with our high school courses, our English 1 and Math 1. And so that's been really important to set forth and sustain the culture around progress in the standards and the competencies, because if at the end of it all they see is an average anyway, it sort of undermines the entire body of thinking. And so we've held that really tight. Now I'm not going to say that it's been easy, especially as we have transitioned to completely remote, and we've got first year pioneers. That's what we call them, not 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. We call them first year, second year, third year, because they could be working on other grade level standards, kind of to Amanda's point, in whatever grade they're assigned to. So we want to, make sure that we give voice to that. But to culturize them, that's what we call it. We've seen those struggles this fall with culturizing our students and our parents. And, we do a lot of coaching. If any of you have worked in a middle school before for any length of time, you know that 6th grade year is very transitional, not only for students, but for parents, especially if it's their first child going into middle school. So we do a lot of coaching of parents anyway, but it's definitely taken on a different level this fall as we are remote and they're converting in our space to competencies and standards, and trying to do all of that online. And so we've been able to protect that for the most part until we can get them face to face and really embed it with them. But we've been able to avoid letter grades to keep the forward momentum around this work.
We only have about a minute or two left, so I just wanted to thank our panelists so much for your participation today. I greatly admire and respect all 4 of you, and it's been an honor to be here on this panel with you. And Elliot, thanks also to the Aurora Institute. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. And I think, are you seeing that slide again with your pictures? Just want to make sure this the screen sharing was happening, right? Great. Yeah, and thank you all so much. It was just also, as she said, a real honor and privilege to learn about what you were doing and to hear the many ways that you've adapted to the pandemic and that you're implementing personalized competency-based education in a variety of ways in your schools across North Carolina. And we really wish you well with continuing to develop these models going forward. We also really appreciate everyone who attended today and all of your participation in the chat box and being with us today. It would be very helpful to us if you could click on the link to our feedback survey, which should be in the chat box. It's just 3 questions and should take about a minute to complete. And while you're finishing that up, I wanted to share more information about our webinar series. Here you can see our 7 remaining webinars in October and November, and they're on a variety of topics to advance your work in competency-based education, such as high school internships, students' use of flex time, performance assessment using proficiency scales, among others. And you can find detailed descriptions of all the webinars and register on our website and at the link we're putting here in the chat box. Whoops. Where did that line come from? Oh, someone using the annotate feature? Okay, as I mentioned earlier, our Aurora Institute Symposium will be held virtually this year on October 26th through 28th. So we hope you'll join us and visit our website for more information. And we're putting a link for that also in the chat box. And finally, I just wanted to say thanks again to everyone for participating in today's webinar. We hope you'll stay connected with us at the Aurora Institute, and please join me again in thanking our presenters from Raleigh Southeast, Innovation Academy, Tri-County Early College High School, and the Explorers School, all in North Carolina. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks so much, and take care, everyone.